This then is chapter 6 from Luck and Folly, entitled On to Pago Pago. In this chapter, we finally get off the boat and I travel from Western Samoa, or from American Samoa to Western Samoa, and end up on an island that some believe was the inspiration for the island Bali High in South Pacific. So here is chapter 6. After leaving Fanning, we sailed to a large empty tract of ocean in the Central Pacific. For weeks, we tracked back and forth across this expanse, recording the features of the seabed, perhaps for the first time. We may have discovered some seamounts or something, I don't remember. The days rolled smoothly by on a seamless loop. Gravitometer, sunrise, breakfast, gravitometer, dinner, sunset, crunch numbers, gravitometer, sunrise. The pleasant, mesmerizing routine was unbroken until one day we got a weak, crackly radio message from the department back in Honolulu. It consisted of several terse one-liners. As best I can remember, they went like this. United States forces have invaded Cambodia. Protests and riots have broken out in all major cities. All universities have closed for the remainder of the school year because of student protests. Students have occupied the administrative offices in several colleges. The University of Hawaii is closed. The state of emergency has been declared. 4 students were shot and killed by National Guardsmen at Kent State. 2 students were shot and killed by National Guardsmen at Jackson State. That was the last communication we had from the outside world. We were completely cut off from everyone, and we had the impression that the United States had descended into open civil war. The next night, several crew members met on deck, and the conversation went something like this. Do you think the country is in a state of armed rebellion? It sounds like it. Students have shut down UH. The Mahi is part of the university. Should we shut it down? Well, also, Dillingham is a military-industrial, part of the military-industrial complex. Wait, goddammit. You're not talking about a bunch of tie-dyed hippies chanting and carrying signs. You're suggesting we mutiny, for God's sake. Do they still keel home mutineers? Or make them walk the plank? How far is it to Pitcairn Island? Let's face it, we're too chicken shit to be mutineers. It still scares me that we considered mutiny, even briefly. Even though we received no other communications from anywhere, rumors began to circulate around the ship. That would be scuttlebutt, right? The best one was that Rap Brown was in Rabaul, New Guinea, stirring up the natives. They had taken over the city and were killing all the white people. Rabaul was where the Mahi would dock at the end of the second leg of the cruise. I think Pago Pago is the most picturesque harbor I've ever seen. The town and harbor lie at the end of a long, narrow inlet, bordered by lush green mountains. The town was much smaller than in the picture seen here. As we entered the channel, Dr. Rose went up on the bow and started playing his fucking bagpipe. Nothing is perfect. As soon as we came ashore, we got some news from Honolulu. The only part that affected me was that 2 more professors wanted to be on the Samoa to Fiji part of this leg. and 2 crew members would have to get off here. Those 2 were myself and Rutka, because we weren't real oceanographers, I guess. For Rutka, it didn't matter because he had to go back anyway. He had a message that his girlfriend, Susie, was pregnant. Rutka seemed actually pleased with the news. This made sense because Susie was wonderful. Island girl, I forget exactly which ethnicity, but not Howley. I had met her one day during the broken generator hiatus. I had sneaked back into town to visit Rutka at his shack. This place was the most unique rental in Honolulu. It was on a large rectangular tract of land that sloped up from the ocean. The property was doomed to development, but while the plans were being drawn up, the owners had rented the one remaining structure to Rutka and Susie, and maybe a few others, I don't remember. The house, or shack, was in a clearing near the middle of the property. From the front lanai, you looked straight out over the jungle to the ocean. If you glanced to either side, you saw a wall of high-rise condos. To get there, you had to park at the property boundary and ascend a trail through the jungle. I'd been at a party at this jungle shack months ago without actually meeting Rutka or Susie. There were no right angles to the house, and no surfaces were either horizontal or vertical. A bright orange refrigerator leaned crazily in one corner of the kitchen. The shack was just begging for a party. During the mentioned visit, Rutka and I sat on the lanai, smoking unfiltered Camels, drinking Primo, and ruminating. Susie joined us off and on, bringing fresh beers. It was another Conrad moment. Native woman gazing out over the water, smokes glowing in the darkness. Almayer's Folly. When we parted in Pago Pago, the last I remember of Rutka was him saying, "Look, I need to stop smoking. Why don't you take this box of cigars?" The crew members were mostly novices at being drunken sailors in port, but we did a plausible approximation. Just across the village green from where we docked was the South Pacific bar of our fantasies. Open to the air on all sides, friendly native woman, view of the ocean, and tepid beer. I remember being there until dark, not much after that. There was one woman who seemed to like me that I became attached to at some point. I remember she stuck her comb in my hair for some reason. Whenever the change from a drink order came back, she always tried to scoop it up into her pocket. I think we went to another swankier bar after that. I recall a taxi ride. Next, I remember stumbling aboard the Mahi with the Samoan woman intent on getting her into my bunk. On the way, we had to pass through the dining room where 5 crew members were playing poker. We entered, and she started screaming and cursing at one of the card players, who was of Japanese descent. She was escorted roughly back up on deck, and I followed. "How about your place?" I said. "My place, $20. Nah, see you later." And I did. The next day, the survivors of the previous evening spree collected on the green. There were also a few expatriates from random countries. One congenial young man from Sydney named Ian joined us. My date, if that is the term, from the night before joined us and started running her fingers through Ian's hair. "Where's my comb?" "It was my hair you put the comb in, not him." We all laughed because Ian was 6 inches taller than me, had kinky black hair, and was clean shaven. I had wavy blonde hair and a beard. Ian gave me an address in Sydney where he had shared a rented house with some university students. He said if I mentioned his name, the students would take me in. Someone explained why my Samoan companion had screamed at the Japanese crew member. It had not been many years since the first movies came to Pago Pago. The only movies available at the time were black and white war movies from World War II. War movies from the early 40s were basically propaganda in which the Japanese were always heartless villains. The Samoans' hatred of Japanese was unfortunate but logical. I hope they have straightened that out by now. I went back to the Mahi to get my pack and then look for local lodging. On the way, I saw Val behind a building teaching young Samoans how to smoke pot. I didn't stay long in Pago Pago. My plan was to keep moving west until I was back where I started. And the next land to the west was Western Samoa. I booked a seat on the inter-island boat that traveled regularly between Pago Pago and Apia, the capital of Western Samoa. The passage took 8 hours and was accomplished on a boat that seemed much too small for the open ocean. There were about 10 passengers, myself, a young American black couple, and a bunch of Samoans. I spent most of the time talking to the black couple because all the Samoans were seasick. There were only 2 hotels in Apia in 1970. The venerable Aggie Gray's and a cheaper one I've forgotten the name of. The black couple and I checked into the cheap one and had a dinner together that night. We had hit it off right away and had a very relaxed, congenial meal. I guess it was because we were the only Americans in the room, and that somehow gave us almost everything in common. We never mentioned race, and it barely crossed my mind. It was an interesting lesson. Samoans always spoke with great reverence and respect for Robert Louis Stevenson. He had lived just a few miles up the road in a mansion called Villa Vailima, which was now a museum. I took the bus there the following day, only to discover that it was the one day of the week that the museum was closed. Well, at least I could see his grave on Mount Vaea. When I started up the trail, I was followed by a boy of about 10. After a while, he asked if I was looking for firewood. Why would I be looking for firewood? Well, this is the trail we take to get firewood. I'm looking for Robert Louis Stevenson's grave. Okay, I can take you there. I sensed he meant for a price, but I followed him. We soon arrived at the grave, and it looked like the pictures I had seen, with the sweeping view down over a forest of coconut palms to the ocean. And there it was, the epitaph he had written for himself. Under a wide and starry sky, dig my grave and let me lie. Glad that I live, and gladly I die, and I lay me down with a will. This is the verse that you graved for me. Here he lies where he longed to be. Home is the sailor, home from the sea, and the hunter home from the hill. I choked up. I lit one of Rutka's cigars and stood staring out to sea for a while. The boy asked if he could have a cigar for leading me to the grave. I forget whether I gave him a cigar or a quarter. In any case, we were now fast friends. And he said I had to come with him to the waterfall. The boy led me to a very nice little waterfall. At the foot of the falls was a large, deep pool. A dozen or so Samoan kids were playing tag. They were swimming, running, and diving from the top of the falls. At their insistence, I joined the game. I was it in about 5 seconds. I could swim and dive about as well as them, so the competition was lively, and I gained a bit of respect. Before long, I had released my inner 10-year-old Samoan. Finally, I said goodbye and walked out to the highway. The bus I wanted had just left and was about 50 yards away. I waved, and the bus stopped. and backed up to get me. That night, I was drinking with some Peace Corps volunteers at the hotel bar, and one young man said, "While you're here, you really should go out to Monono Island. Ask for Leatao Iosefa when you get there. He will take care of you." The next day, I took the bus to the extreme western end of the island, got off at a small pier. I could see a low island about 2 miles out to sea. Soon a rowboat appeared, and a large Samoan climbed onto the pier, took my backpack, and ushered me into the boat. "Do you know Leatao Iosefa?" I asked. "I am Leatao," he said and smiled. "I am the chief of Monono. You are welcome to stay with my family." As soon as the boat tied up, he shouldered my pack and carried it the short distance to his house. His house looked much like the others, except that its roof was corrugated iron instead of thatch. The houses were really just large pavilions, that is, a roof on posts. Under the eaves were rolled up bamboo slat curtains that could be rolled down at night or during a rainstorm. During the day, the continuous trade winds kept the interior cool. Leatao and his wife had some education, I think maybe at UH. She was a nurse and he was a professional chief. I never really arrived at a complete understanding of their method of government and economics. It seemed to be an elaborate system of gift giving. Someone said that there was a lot of stress on the chiefs to make it all work, to the point that they suffered from stomach ulcers. Don't take my word for it. Read Margaret Mead or something. In front of the Iosefa's house, several workmen were building a new ferry boat with hand tools. Like the current ferry, it would be a plank boat. Think about it. How is it possible to build a watertight boat without power tools? I didn't even see any measuring tools. The next afternoon, work stopped, and Leatao brought out a large wooden bowl filled with a murky liquid and a coconut shell cup. This turned out to be my welcoming ceremony, a kava kava ritual. I think I remember that this mild narcotic is called kava kava in Fiji and something like yangona in Samoa. It is a water suspension of the ground-up root of some kind of pepper plant. The ceremony goes like this. You take a cup of the stuff, drink almost all of it, throw the last few drops to the gods, say, "Monwea," and pass the cup. Like many drugs, the first time you try it is the most enjoyable. Not a raging high, but more like the first cigarette of the day. The islanders swear that this is the island that Rogers and Hammerstein had in mind when they wrote Bali High. Not everyone agrees. I walked around the island one day. I climbed to the high point the next. Swam, watched the boat builders, talked to the locals. The food was very good. Roasted breadfruit, always fish, and a big treat one night when someone had caught an eel. We ate sitting cross-legged on the floor. I noticed that the women prepared the food in a separate cookhouse, brought it to the main house, and ate separately later. I had been forewarned against dining etiquette faux pas. The greatest affront is to show anyone the soles of your feet. Thighs are considered too titillating and are never exposed. Breasts, not such a big deal. Everyone has tattoos, but you can only get glimpses of them because they're mostly on the legs. One night I woke up to the sound of Leatao shouting at his son and the son whimpering. Eventually I figured out that the cause of the confrontation was that the son had said a bad word. The thing is that the Samoans swallowed Christianity hook, line, and sinker. At least they accepted the parts that didn't conflict with their traditions. their system of government or their drug preferences. Not swearing is one of the tenets they did adhere to. The next day, Leotow said it would be a good time for me to say goodbye. I sensed that his problem with his son's language played out in my presence had been very embarrassing for him and his wife. Too bad. He begged me to send him postcards from wherever I went. I returned to the cheaper hotel in Apia. One of the best benefits of the job on the Mahi was that I got paid transportation back to Honolulu. The really good part was that it was in the form of an open plane ticket with any airline in any direction for a total distance of 2,500 miles. Price didn't matter, just miles. Next afternoon, I was drinking at the hotel bar and I waited while I waited to get on the plane to Fiji. I had been told that this bar was the watering hole for the movers and shakers of Western Samoa, although I sensed that governing this country did not demand a great deal of moving or shaking. The next day, I did see a scattering. That day, I did see a scattering of large, satisfied-looking Samoan men sprawled around the lounge that looked the part. Somehow I fell into a conversation with a small, engaging Indian man. I've forgotten his name. Let's call him Mahendra. He had something to do with the educational administration of the nation of Fiji. We talked of education, science, and the philosophy of both. I said I had to leave to catch a plane to Fiji. He said that I could stay at his place in Suva, and that all I had to do was go next door to his next door neighbor, Wally, and ask for the key. We had known each other about 10 minutes. Blanche and I have always depended on the kindness of strangers. Vagrant thoughts. I should say something more about my first marriage to Linda, and I realize I've been putting it off. Are there memoir rules that prohibit you from sidestepping memories fraught with guilt and regrets? And that's the end of chapter 6.